Once upon a time, there was a kind woman who lived alone. She had a pleasant cottage and a small farm with a few cattle on it. Her life was very good, but she was unhappy. She longed for a baby. Every night she stood by her window and prayed to God to grant her a child. One night, the woman's prayers caught the attention of a passing fairy. The fairy felt pity for the poor woman, and so she gave her a tiny seed. "Plant it in a pot," the fairy said, "and your wish will come true." The woman thanked the fairy and did exactly as she had been told. Days went by, and the seed began to sprout. The woman was very excited, but unsure how the fairy's gift would fulfill her wish. Then one day, she noticed that the plant had started to bud. She approached the bud, and it slowly began to bloom into the most beautiful flower the woman had ever seen. The woman took a closer look, and, to her astonishment, she found a lovely, very tiny little girl sitting in the middle of the flower. "Oh my!" the woman exclaimed. "Why, you're no bigger than my thumb." She took the girl in her hand and named her Thumblina. The woman was overjoyed to have Thumblina in her life. She took excellent care of her and loved her very much. Every night before bed, she would tell Thumbelina stories of princes and princesses, and Thumbelina would imagine herself marrying a handsome prince one day. After her mother had said good night, Thumbelina would crawl out of her little walnut bed and sing and dance as if she were at a royal ball. Thumbelina had the most beautiful voice ever. Just then, Cornelius, the Prince of the Seasons, was passing by. He heard Thumbelina's song and flew his trusty dragonfly to the window to see where such a beautiful melody was coming from. Cornelius crept through a small hole in the window and into Thumbelina's room. Thumbelina was alarmed at the intruder, but Cornelius explained who he was and that he'd only come in to hear her beautiful voice. Thumbelina was intrigued by this prince who was the same size as she. They became friends. Cornelius invited Thumbelina for a ride on his dragonfly. She enthusiastically agreed. Who wouldn't want to ride a dragonfly? They flew to a beautiful garden near a lake. The garden was filled with the most exquisite, sweet-smelling flowers, and a fountain splashed lightly into the calm waters of the lake. Thumbelina was overwhelmed by the heavenly beauty that surrounded her. Thumbelina noticed that Cornelius had a set of wings and wondered if she could get some wings for herself. Before Cornelius could answer, a fat, ugly toad interrupted them. "I want to marry you," he told Thumbelina. Thumbelina politely refused, and she and Cornelius made their way back to her home. It was almost dawn when Thumbelina and Cornelius returned. Cornelius explained that he must go, but that he would come back the next evening. He asked Thumbelina to wait for him by the window. The next night, Thumbelina was waiting for Cornelius when the ugly toad they had met by the lake jumped up to the window. He took Thumbelina by the hand and pulled her out of her house. Thumbelina cried out, but her mother was asleep and did not hear her daughter's tiny voice. The sneaky toad carried her off to his lily pad. Little Thumbelina was miserable. The toad's lily pad was surrounded by water, and even if the toad left, Thumbelina was trapped. Luckily, a swallow flying overhead heard Thumbelina weeping. The swallow asked her why she was crying, and upon hearing Thumbelina's story, he told her to climb on his back. He would take her back to the cottage. Thumbelina and the swallow flew through the sky. However, Thumbelina was becoming very hungry. The swallow landed and told her to sit under the shade of a nearby tree until he returned with food. While Thumbelina was waiting for the swallow to come back, a mole saw her from afar. "What a nice meal I'll have for supper," it thought. He came nearer, and Thumbelina was frightened by his long, sharp teeth. She called for help, but the mole caught her and dragged her down into his hole. The swallow returned to find Thumbelina missing and decided to fly to Thumbelina's mother. As he flew, he met none other than Cornelius. The swallow told Cornelius of Thumbelina's trouble with the toad and how he had left her in the shade of the tree. Cornelius and the swallow returned to the tree to look for clues about Thumbelina. Suddenly, they heard her voice coming from a big hole nearby. With no time to lose, Cornelius and the swallow bravely ventured into the hole. The hole was very dark. They found Thumbelina tied to a rock with thick rope. The mole was not far away, so they knew they had to be very careful. Cornelius was untying Thumbelina as quietly as he could when, without warning, the mole attacked. Cornelius did his best to keep the ferocious mole at bay. The mole was very strong, but Cornelius was the prince of all seasons. Cornelius used his magic wand and turned the mole into a statue made of ice. They had won. Thumbelina and Cornelius rode his dragonfly through the clouds once more, the swallow by their side. They headed back to Thumbelina's cottage. Thumbelina's mother was sitting by the window, weeping that her sweet daughter was gone. As soon as she saw Thumbelina return, she jumped for joy and hugged her daughter tight. Cornelius told the woman how Thumbelina had been captured by a toad and then a mole, and how they had rescued her. "Oh, thank you, tiny prince," the woman said. "I would do anything to repay you." Cornelius told the woman that his only desire was to make Thumbelina his wife. Thumbelina and Cornelius were married in the garden by the lake. She was now the princess of the seasons, and as a wedding gift, Cornelius gave her the pair of wings she had so wanted. The woman was happy for her little daughter, and Thumbelina and Cornelius were happy for all the seasons ever after.